Good morning. Sorry for starting late. We're starting the first session of Policy SIG of APNIC 49. In Policy SIG, we discuss policies to develop manage and number resources. And also we discuss about tools like RPKI, whois, and other things here. So today in two sessions, first session actually will be more discussing about the policies we have passed in previous sessions and their implementation update and challenges in implementations. In the second session, we'll be discussing 3 policy proposals submitted for this meeting. But before going to discuss policy, the first important agenda for today is the co-chair election. So I'll request Sunny to conduct the election.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to APNIC 49 here in Melbourne. Hope you're enjoying the conference. So as the chair said, the first agenda item of the SIG session is elections. Whenever we have elections, we have to run the elections first, and then I hand over the floor to the chairs. My name is Sunny. I'm the secretariat staff and SIG support as well. So we have, that's the wrong one. Sorry. Thank you so much. So the term ends for 2 co-chairs of the SIG, that's Ching Heng Koo and Bertrand Charrier, here after this conference. And we have opened a call for nominations of the co-chair positions. We send the announcement to the APNIC talk and SIG, Policy SIG as per the SIG guidelines on 15th January, and we close the nominations on 16th of January on Sunday. The term for the co-chairs is 2 years. That starts after this conference. The co-chair responsibilities are published online in the SIG guidelines. Basically, they have to be part of the SIG mailing list. They have to assist the chair, and if the chair is not here in the SIG session, they have to take the responsibility of chairing the session, and etc. The election procedures, candidates must be present in the room, and this is as per the SIG guidelines again. Candidates will have 2 minutes to speak to the participants. Voting is by those present in the room, excluding APNIC staff and RIR staff and RIR board members. The election is decided by a count of show of hands, and my colleagues will take the count. The candidate with the large number of the counts is elected. The co-chair nominations that we received in the order: Rafiq, Ching Heng Koo, and Bertrand Charrier. So is Rafiq in the room? Or Rafiq? No? In that case, we have 2 openings for the co-chairs, and there's 2 nominations here. The current co-chairs put their nominations in. So I just call for a round of support with a round of applause. If you agree that the co-chairs, the current co-chairs are performing well, and they will continue to do so. If you believe in that, please give them a round of applause to express your support. Congratulations, Ching Heng and Bertrand. Please come and take your seat. And I'll pass the floor to the chair. Thank you.
Congratulations, Bertrand and Ching Heng. And Ching Heng, can you please go straight away with the SIG administration slides? SIG administration is about how actually APNIC policy development process works. Those who are regular here, nothing new here, but I can see some new faces for you. This is something how we actually develop policies. Thank you.
Okay, thanks to be elected Policy SIG chair, co-chair again. And I will report the Policy SIG administration, Chair Suman, co-chair Bertrand, and Jing Hen. And the current Policy SIG chapter is to develop policies which related to the management and the use of internet resource, number resources within the Asia Pacific region. This include policies for resource allocation, recovery and transfer, and for resource registration within whois, reverse DNS, RPKI, and related services. And some proposals are abandoned. Proposal 124 and 126 did not reach consensus at APNIC 46, 47, and 48. And this diagram reminds the APNIC PDP, and the policy proposal is started from the proposal submission, and will be discussed in the mailing list and the Policy SIG. They need to be make consensus at the Policy SIG and the member meeting. And following, there are some common period and need EC endorsement. And Secretariat will adhere to your comment periods, and finally, the policy will be implemented. And the policy consensus decision making. Consensus means the general agreement is taking into consideration comments on the mailing list and at the open policy meeting. Objection include a minor objection and the major objection. The minor objection is some problems may occur for some members of the group. The major objections will be occur for parts of the community. Participants should work together to resolve the objections. How to gain in the consensus? Welcome the remote participants, and the chair will consider mailing this discussion. We are discussing at the open policy meeting and the remote participant, and show of hands and the comfort. And we will leave some time to all to make sure you can log in at the comfort. Please use the following link, the comfort.apnic.net. You can create a comfort account. The APNIC member, if you are already an APNIC, you can register for my APNIC and use the same account to log in. You are not an APNIC member. You already registered account at a previous conference. You can use the same account to log in. And you also can create a new account. This requires an accessible email address, and confirm the link will be sent the email for the verification. And if you forgot your password, the password can reset feature is available. So please log into the comfort.apnic.net. So there are some reference by the APNIC PTP and the SIG guideline and the comfort on the screen. So please join the comfort.apnic.net. This is my presentation. Thanks.
Thank you, Ching. I will now request Mr. Sunny Chandy, Senior Advisor, Policy and Community Development, to come again with the APNIC 48 implementation update.
Thank you, Chair. We will display that confer URL before every policy goes for consensus. So if we don't remember it, we'll put it up on the screen again. But it's easy, it's confer.apnic.net, the URL. The 48 implementation. What's going on? No, not that one. That's the last one, Shakir. Sorry, there's too many presentations today, so getting the order right. That's it? Yeah, thank you. So there's two parts to this implementation. The first part, not much, but really I'll present that one, and then I invite my colleague George Michelson to discuss more about the next one. The first one is the Prop 131, editorial changes in IPv6 policy. And the second one, Prop 132, RPKI rows for unallocated and unassigned APNIC address space. These two proposals reached consensus last meeting. So we're just giving you an update. So the editorial changes in IPv6 policy proposed changes to the current policy manual in section 5.2.42, 5.2.43, and 10.1.41. And we have implemented these changes in the policy manual on 4th of February 2020 after opening it for editorial change comments for a month. The Prop 132, I think as you know, it's AS0 for ROAs, but the title was changed to RPKI ROAs for unallocated and unassigned APNIC address space. This proposal gives the authority for APNIC to create AS0 ROA for undelegated address space to resolve the issue of the bogon announcements. The status is pending implementation. We are targeting early to mid-2020, and now I invite my colleague George Michelson to actually go through the implementation plan and what we have done so far. Thank you.
Hello everyone. I'm going to present on our implementation planning for Prop 132, the AS0 for unallocated spaces activity. So the implementation plan that we are working on is essentially 4 discrete stages. Late last year, after the policy reached consensus, we began a process of exploring the technology, and internally we discussed a model, and that has been completed. So in the first quarter of the year, we want to expose to you our thinking in the model and discuss some open issues around the approach that we are taking. And if we gain confidence that what we're doing aligns with the intent of the community, we will then proceed by mid-year to an initial deployment and report back in the late half of the year at APNIC 50 with some statistics and status of the project. So we've completed the first phase, and what we are doing now is trying to re-engage with you and understand if our intent aligns with your expectation. So, we are proposing to publish AS0 ROAs in stages. And we have done this with an intent to understand the behavior of the system. So we will set up a test bed, and it will have examples of what AS0 would look like in full production, and it will run in a daily cycle. When we actually go to launch, what we are proposing to do is to start with the safest ranges to tag as unroutable. And we determined that this would be the experimental and documentation address space. Once we've proved capability with this class of address, we then expect to proceed forward and include all of the address space that is undelegated. And then finally, we would add the addresses that have previously been in use but have been returned into the system. So our reasoning, hello, I seem to have problems forwarding the pack. Here we go, thank you. So why stages? Well, essentially this is to try and minimize risk. So the first set of prefixes we are using has the least impact on globally routed address space because these are addresses which definedly in RFCs have no validity in routing. And so we could not see a context where legitimate use of globally routed addresses would be impacted in this class. Then we were proceeding to things which we could delegate in the future, but again have never historically been delegated. So this reduces the likelihood that anyone previously routing this resource and believing they still have its use is impacted because we disavow its routability. It does have the risk that we don't clear AS0 for a delegation of a new resource, but that's a contained problem about one person rather than a potentially larger problem. And then finally, we would be adding the class of addresses which have previously been known to be routed. And there is that potential, unlikely, but nonetheless there, that this has some impact on people. So we leave that until last. We'd like to understand if this general model aligns with community expectations. I might add that these questions are in a summary at the end, so I just invite you to think about that now. So the second thing is that we propose to align our state of AS0 publications with the delegation statistics. It will be possible to look in the delegated statistics and see every resource that we intend including in this system. I've included the URL to find the canonical version of that data. This is what the file looks like. It's a simple textual variant of CSV, and it lists every resource in every category, IPv4, IPv6 and ASN, and it has a status flag that says whether it's allocated or assigned, or whether it's unavailable or reserved or available. So it's quite clear what prefixes are in what state. So the motivation for this alignment is that it's the most publicly visible data in a single form that would allow absolutely anyone to perform a comparison between what we publish and what we declare as available or reserved. And it's very unambiguous. There is a very clear prescriptive definition of every line of data in this file, which means when we say we are only making AS0 against available and reserved, you can go straight to this file and you can find all of those lines, and you can then see if AS0 state aligns. So it's simple. We'd like to understand if this aligns with your intent in policy for how we implement this service. So the next thing, and possibly the most significant thing, is that we intend using a discrete and separate trust anchor locator. So if you are not familiar with RPKI, RPKI is RPKI, and all PKIs, public key infrastructure, all forms of PKI critically depend on the concept of a trust anchor. A trust anchor is, if you use the language of philosophy and logic, it's something that is an axiom that you simply must accept. It's not negotiable, it's not something you can choose not to do. If you have this trust anchor, everything it states beneath it has been validated. You must implicitly accept because the trust anchor has validated it. So, a trust anchor is a critical component of a PKI. In RPKI, resource PKI, each RIR is operating a trust anchor, and we are proposing to run an additional trust anchor off to one side of our normal delegation practice. And the reason we have done this is that it changes the dynamic of use of the AS0 rower. If we included all of the AS0 objects under the existing trust anchor, then all of the configured validating systems, which are being run by the people we call relying parties, and they are the ones who in the community are consuming our products, testing them, and then relying on the result of that to perform some operation, all of them automatically would have inherited the visibility of AS0. Now, that is very powerful. That is a mechanism that we would call opt-out. You would have to deliberately design your behavior to exclude these objects because by default, you are going to see them. But although that's very powerful, it's also very high risk. It means that if there is a consequence of misapplication of this model, if we have made some mistake or if we do not understand the technology, we have immediately affected all relying parties. If we use a discrete trust anchor, we change the dynamic from opt-out to opt-in. In order to see our products, you must consciously and deliberately have included the new trust anchor. So the dynamic has changed from a default behavior where everyone is affected to a behavior where only people who choose and consciously subscribe to what we are doing become affected. There are some ancillary benefits, particularly because this thing will be a discrete system. If we measure behavior at that system, we get a very clear signal of who is actually using it and how that is growing and compares to use of the baseline service. So in order to deliver a report back to you in the community, this mechanism is very powerful. We also like that it separates out our normal behavior and our normal delegation behavior from this new class of behavior. It means that we have, if you like, a separation of functions that is quite safe for us. We make no alteration to our normal delegation logistics. We have added a new behavior, but without altering our mainline function. Based on the experience that we gather over the life of this project, the community can help us decide if we should bring this back under a single trust anchor. So again, we would like you to consider if this model of adoption aligns with your intent in using this service. So there are some things that are slightly less formal that we are considering in the deployment. We're concerned that there is a property that you could call hysteresis in the system. When you have published states in RPKI, they persist for a period of time. And if you then change the publication status and revoke something, your previous publication state, it continues to persist for some period of time until it ages out. And we're worried that there may be an impact on the consequence of having to do revocation acts to remove things from AS0 and the effect that will have on the visibility of those resources in global routing. In particular, our concern is that it will affect the dynamics of delegation. Now, you must understand that our normal delegation behavior is that one of you will apply for a resource and there is a process which occupies days or possibly weeks to validate that application. And at the end, when we say, yes, you are valid, you have achieved a policy, we are going to give you a resource under policy, there is also a process of logistics to deploy configurations that generally takes days. So the vast majority of delegations are extremely unlikely to encounter a problem because of the hysteresis of the system, remembering that we have disavowed routability. But there are corner cases, there are always corner cases, and there will be companies who are placed in an extreme circumstance where they have an urgent need of a delegation, they successfully complete registration, we make a delegation to them, and potentially some community won't be able to route resources because we will still have lingering state. And we just need to understand how this is going to affect belief and trust in the delegation process. And it may be we have to alter our processes to try and minimize this effect. There is also the question of how other RIRs are thinking about this activity. We know that at least 2 other RIRs have discussed or have in current discussion policies in this space. 3, I'm told by Geordie. And so there is an emerging sense, well, if we achieve a state where all of us do this, it is probably likely we should converge in a single model. It is not helpful to the community if we have made decisions which don't align with the behaviour of the other RIR. So given we are, at some sense, leading the way, there's consequence from decisions we take about the architecture of this system on other people. I don't think that is a problem in APNIC, but I feel we should communicate this because there's potential for people in the community who are making policy proposals or discussing this to have to reflect whether there is some commonality that needs to be shared. So we will be engaging in broad outreach to other RIR communities, to the IETF, to discuss what we are doing and try to achieve some sense of convergence. So, we actually have already implemented a fully functioning testbed. The URL of the trust anchor locator is shown here, and it contains the textual form which will work immediately in the Routinator validator and can be trivially reformatted to work with the RIPE version 3 validator or with RPStir or with DragonNet software. So we have already deployed a TAL that can be configured into the existing validation systems. And although it was not formally proposed in the policy, we have made a decision to include a slurm file alongside the AS0. Slurm is a notation for representing a set of resources and origin ASs that you wish to accept without having to undertake heavyweight crypto validation. And it is a little unusual to take a slurm file from anyone else. By its very nature, this is something that you should never accept and you should simply construct for yourself, because it is a statement of things that you will not validate and you will accept absolutely. It's analogous to a trust anchor. It's quite powerful. But we felt by publishing this file, we would enable ISPs to consider including this as a configuration item, perhaps an additional feature of their own validation. Obviously, we would encourage people to check its contents, and we have begun a discussion with Dimar from ZDNS, who is active in our community and active in exploring RPKI. He has a draft in proposal in IETF for a validation framework for fetching slurm files. So this is a trusted communication channel to allow you to fetch a slurm file without a risk that it has been interfered with in transit. And it's possible we will move to publication of a secured, validated slurm file. We've implemented the system using the NLNet Labs Krill software. We found this extremely easy to work with. It is a very simple, straightforward, robust system. And we strongly recommend that anyone who is considering entering RPKI with self-hosting look at this software. We had to make a modification, which I will try and discuss a bit further, to produce a smaller number of objects. By default, Krill tries to publish one rower for one prefix. In our mechanism for allocating IPv6, we construct a large number of spaces because we are implementing a policy-driven directive called sparse allocation. So in dense allocation, you would allocate sequentially adjacent blocks of address. In sparse allocation, you deliberately allocate addresses as far apart in the number field as possible. And by definition, there are 2 holes beside every allocation. which means if you have 32,000 allocations, you have somewhere between 32,000 and 62,000 holes that you have to account for, depending how you have arranged this and how things line up in the prefix space. And as a consequence, although we initially thought, oh, AS0 will be a single file with maybe only 200 things, V4 thinking, 200 holes in V4, it turns out an AS0 rower for V4 and V6 will have 65,000 lines. Now, we could have done this as a single file, but we reconsidered that, which I will show you later. So, the structure that we have constructed in this test bed is a strong analog of our normal delegation machine. It follows the same architecture. And we did this so that people will see we are respecting the same delegation hierarchy we use for positive statements and negative statements. There is a trust anchor. Currently, this is not in an HSM. It is not hardware secured, but it will in production be in an HSM. And that trust anchor has an intermediate child that is an exact clone of all the resources that are listed in the trust anchor. And that intermediate is issuing the production certificate, and that does not state all resources. Our production certificate has the specific list of resources that we are entitled and delegated to operate over. That then issues the rowers that we are producing. That is a single point of variance from our normal practice, because in normal practice, APNIC does not issue rowers. We normally make no assertions regarding routability in our mainline system. So the normal production system only issues certificates. This production system is only issuing rowers. So we have one, and it's live. It's a temporary trust anchor. When we deploy in service, people are going to have to do a manual conversion to a new trust anchor key. The state is based on the externally visible delegated stats file. It's public data. But during the daily cycle, as we become aware of transactions in that day, we then publish revisions of AS0, and they will align with the publicly visible statistics file that we produce at the next day's boundary. So there is a slight variation between public state of delegated and public state in AS0. We understand this, and we are thinking about how we can reduce that impact, potentially by increasing the frequency of republication of the daily statistics file. But it's possible that we will have to come back and say, although it aligns with the statistics file, it has variances within the set of operations we do in any given day. The regeneration cycle is about 10 minutes, and we believe this is sustainable in a production model. So we are not making a commitment, but our intent is that we will maintain a 10-minute production cycle. So why not one rower? I've already touched on. The single rower was going to be a very, very large object. It was probably going to be the largest, most complex object in the global RPKI system. And there is a technical peculiarity of how these things are encoded as binary data. They use a notation called ASN1, Abstract Syntax Notation number 1, which is a very dense binary encoding. And the problem is, most of the systems which deal with ASN1 incur a huge memory burden reading an ASN1 object to omit the legal states that are encoded inside it. And we felt if we create the world's largest rower, which will then require all ASN1 systems to read the world's largest binary ASN1 state and then emit 65,000 lines of output when it has successfully parsed, we might not be doing people a favor. The second thing is a problem that's been discussed in routing, and it's called fate sharing. If a rower is incorrectly constructed, all of the prefixes that are inside that rower share the fate that none of them can be validated. So by omitting AS0 as a single object, we created a state where the validity of all AS0 statements share fate. And we felt by moving to a system where we create discrete, separate rower, we reduced the risk of shared fate if we had a problem in production of just one element in that system. We had to make modifications to CRIL, but it was a really, really simple change, and we're quite comfortable that that is working. So I said it's live. This is a view of a reconfiguration of the RIPE validator, and you can see here it actually has already seen 2,379 AS0 states. It's currently about 3,000 states. So 3,000 discrete objects representing around 60 to 65,000 different prefixes. And this is the textual dump of that state that many people are using as an analytical tool, and it shows the list of ASs, which in this case will always be AS0, and the set of prefixes that have been included from that validation. So, in summary, these are the questions that we feel have to be confirmed in you, in the community, for us to proceed to the next stage. And I don't think we have a high formalism burden here. I think some level of rough consensus judged by the SIG chairs would be acceptable, possibly on the list. I don't know. I think you should feel free to come up with a mechanism you feel comfortable with. But this is a summary of the questions and considerations we would like to understand that you are comfortable with, so we proceed to the next stage. Thank you.
Thank you, George. It's a very important topic. So if anyone have any comments, we're running out of time, but please.
I'm sorry that I took so long to do this, but because of the change in behavior from a passive RIR in routing to an RIR that has active engagement in routing, we felt a very, very strong burden to be confident that you understood what we are doing. But I'm sorry it took so long.
Jordi Palet, about the implementation in stages, I am not sure to understand why this order. I am not concerned, but it's just more a matter of trying to understand why.
So the question in our mind, the entry question is, who is affected? If you start with the prefixes which are defined as never to be routed, documentation and the experimental prefix set, then impact on routing, these objects should never have been visible. If any part of RFC 1918 had been included, it would be tempting to have included that, except you know and I know a large amount of 1918 actually is visible in routing. However, I suspect it's not valid. Nonetheless, well, it's definedly not valid, but there's no two-way flow. Nonetheless, these first two, the experimental and documentation, we believe have close to zero impact. So the next set of resources, the only people who could be affected would be the bad guys. And the intent of the policy is to stop the bad guys. So at some level, the next step is the obvious visible state where somebody is affected. Curse you, I can't do bad things. But it's the least likely harm. The last set, resources that have been validly used, we then reclaimed them. They underwent a period where they should not be visible, and we are now in the act of considering release. They have potential to cause damage. Because that asymmetry were in use, and our belief are reclaimed, there is potential for a gap in understanding. Perhaps our communication went to an address you're not reading. Perhaps you are using them in a constrained routing space where we can't see you in global BGP. So our normal checks is visible, say, no, it's not visible, but in a constrained space, you have routing capability. We then issue AS0 and suddenly your partners drop you. That's damage. So we were thinking, do this last after we've shown the process is working. That was our chain of reasoning.
Yeah.
Does that help you?
I see that it clearly now, yeah. My other point is, I agree with to ROAS. This allows also the people to decide if they...
tau.
So, yeah, if they want to use the AS0 or not, okay? So it gives some freedom to the operators to say, we want to make, to follow AS0 or not. Yeah. And my last point, I don't think it makes sense to go to a global policy unless we are just trying to make a global policy for defining the timing. Because we know that getting a global policy, it will take longer. And I don't really think anyway it's necessary because, as you said, most of the time, if you allocate or assign a resource, probably it's not going to the routing table in the next hours. It takes several days. So I don't think it causes any problem unless there is a case where somebody got a resource, they are not using RPKI, and they want to announce in minutes. That's the only possible case where they may have a problem.
So I think you are right, but I was mentally focused on the divergence of implementation methodology. And so it may be that there's subsequent work to ask that all of our AS0s align in structure and intent. I don't know if that requires some cohesion, but if people in your role who are part of the touring circus of policy, if you're happy to confront and discuss the divergence between us from the floor when you pursue policy advancement, we don't need a global policy. We just expect that we try to do the same thing. And I have gone to my engineering colleagues in the RIR system saying, if you do AS0, please could you think about doing it this way? But that isn't a binding, that's a consensual convergence. And I only put the question to give you an opportunity to consider, do I want to make a binding determination? That's all.
I think because the, let's say, technical work that you do among all the RIRs, it will be easier if you can actually agree by yourself without needing a global policy.
Okay. Thank you, Jordi.
Aftab?
Aftab Siddiqui. Thank you, George, for bringing this up here. I wouldn't have agreed with the initial deployment plan of having a TEL, separate TEL, but this is what we agreed in the policy discussion, so I'm pretty much okay with that, but I want to emphasize on one thing.
Yes.
This is the initial deployment plan, and that's what we agreed on. And the idea was once we move on to the actual deployment, we will be able to merge it if the community agrees.
Yes, I think I perhaps couched couched that in a slightly more soft process, saying subject to community approval.
Absolutely.
But you are saying, no, there was a clear signal of intent.
Yep.
And I think the difference is really that we are the servants and you are the masters, and you need to make it clear we will do what you tell us. So I will take that on board. We will do what the community tells us to do.
I just need to give one quick clarification on one thing, that APNIC takes longer time to delegate resources to the new members. It's sometimes, being a member myself, I know usually it takes 3 to 4 days. So it's not going to impact anyway. But still, let's see how it goes.
The problem inside the machine is not the 3 to 4 days between your question and our answer. It's the time gap between we make the delegation really happen and your answer. And that may be very close to you being told. So you start a door, and then at the end, we commit a range. We're going to take it off AS0, but we tell you half an hour later. If we change that process to preemptively assume on the good side you will get the resource, take it off AS0, do the process work. If we head to the good outcome when we tell you it's this prefix, it will be okay. If it goes to the bad side and we say, no, you have failed process, this won't come to you, we'd have to put it back on AS0, but that would be a lower consequence.
But that's a membership agreement issue, not a technical issue, in my opinion. You can tell people when you apply for resources, even when you get approval, it will take 24 to 48 hours before we can actually assign.
We could modify that kind of operational consequence.
Just an operational thing.
Yeah,
right?
we can do that. Thank you.
Last one I have is you showed 250 IPv4 ROAs. I'm not sure, I mean, I still have to download the TEL and see what's happening there. But if I look at the delegated file from the NRO, there are 1,500 IPv4 allocation marked as reserved under APNIC, and only 8 V4 marked as available. So I
may have to go and check exactly what we did in testbed, and maybe I've mistranscribed a statement. It's possible it's 250 objects which encode multiple prefixes, but I didn't think we were doing that in V4. I thought it was one discrete object for prefix.
That's what my assumption was.
Thank you for the distinction. That's important, and we will check.
Okay. Yeah, that's
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Aftab. I know it's difficult, it's a bit technical, so comment now. If you have any observation, comment, please write to post to mailing list. But last, if anyone have any objection or any serious issue with this implementation, please come to the mic and talk, or you can.
Sunny Chendi from APNIC. The last statement you made, posting to the mailing list, is not very, it's not clarified. You know, could you clarify? Would you like the Secretariat to post those questions to the mailing list, or? I
think better we can post to the mailing list, and so that a larger community can actually
have a say in it.
If they have to say something, they can actually point it out. If they feel any issue, any complexity with that, would be nice. But But in general, I think there is no major disagreement. So I think we can go for as per implementation.
So again, we post or not post to the mailing list?
We should post, I think.
Okay,
we should post, and then we can get some more feedback that may help to improve this process.
All right. And if we post to the mailing list, how long should we allow time? Do we follow the same editorial process guidelines that allows 1 month?
I think the implementation plan should be going as per schedule. I think it's a test bed we are deploying now.
Yep.
So let's not make it like a policy that it has to go all these formalities and post to the mailing list. So.
And we open for a month. Is that okay? 4 weeks?
Yeah,
comment period?
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, George Michelson. And I'll now request George Odagi to come forward about the 125 implementation update.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Hope you're having a good week at the conference so far. My name's George Odagi. I work in the APNIC services team. I also provide support to the APNIC policy process and to the SIGs during the conference. So in today's update, I'll giving you a brief summary of the implementation of Prop 125 over the last year. We'll also be sharing some experiences about the lessons learned, and also included some feedback that we've received from members regarding this implementation. So this policy proposal was submitted in August 2018. It reached consensus at the Policy SIG and the annual members meeting in APNIC 46 in New Caledonia. Consensus was confirmed throughout the policy development process, and as a result, it was endorsed by the APNIC Executive Council in December 2018. We started the implementation planning in January 2019, and it was decided that we would roll this implementation out in multiple phases due to the complexity, and it was a new process that was being introduced through our procedures. So for those of you who don't know what an IIT object is, it's an object in the APNIC whois database which contains contact information of the network administrators that are responsible for receiving network abuse reports for an organisation. It became mandatory as part of Prop 079 at the APNIC 29 meeting, and we implemented it in November 2010. Prior to this, there was no real record for people to report network abuse, and people would generally send it to the admin C and tech C email addresses in the whois database. And the spirit of this policy was to provide a more accurate and efficient way for abuse reports to reach the correct contact in an organisation. So this is what it looks like, the IT object. There's two email address attributes, the email and abuse mailbox. So this can usually be the same email address or two different ones. So moving into the more finer details of the implementation, it was implemented from 1st of July 2019. One of the requirements was that all email addresses in the IT object would be validated, and the validation process would be completed by a human person, and it would not be automated or cheated. The frequency of the validation was to be done every time the IT object email address was updated, or on a 6-monthly cycle. And the member would need to demonstrate that the abuse mailbox was being monitored by a person, and they would need to confirm that they would be responsive to legitimate reports of network abuse and respond in a timely manner. Failing to validate after 15 days meant that the IT object would be marked as invalid in the whois database, and after 30 days, if there was still no action, their APNIC access would be restricted. So this is a screenshot of what the actual validation email looks like. The person looking after the network abuse mailbox would receive this email, and they would need to click on the unique validation link that's at the bottom. Clicking on the link would take them to a separate web page where they would be required to confirm that they understand the policy requirements to regularly monitor their abuse mailbox and promptly respond to abuse reports to resolve any complaints. We've also used Google's reCAPTCHA security feature here, which kind of verifies that it's a person that's doing the validation and makes it harder for bots to cheat the web page. So yeah, generally once they click on the Validate RT button for that particular email address, that's the end of the process for the next 6 months. But for members who want to review the validation status, they can also do so in this new page that we've created in APNIC. This page lists all the RT email addresses that need to be validated. It shows you which ones haven't been validated, which ones have been validated, and any pending email addresses that need to be validated in the future. It also allows them to update the RT email address on this page or resend a validation link, validation email if they've lost it or have not received it. So moving on to the implementation status, the first stage was completed in July last year, and this only included the validation of RT emails associated with parent resource records. We also created a new escalation mailbox and process which allow people to report cases of network abuse reports that weren't being responded to or actioned. Once we received this report, we would escalate it and look at it at a case-by-case manner. And if there was no validation that had been completed for that email address, we would trigger a validation request. The phase 2 included all other IRTs associated with customer assignments that were registered under the parent resource records. And we also resolved some issues that were encountered during the first phase, such as software bugs, which we'll go into more details shortly. So firstly, some stats about the validation over the last 6 months. There were just under 16,000 IRTs that were identified, which were referenced in APNIC resources. Just over 9,600 email validation requests were sent to members, and out of those, just under 6,000 were confirmed and validated, which leaves us at a validation rate of just over 60%. Unfortunately, we did encounter some roadblocks as part of this implementation. We had members report several software bugs which were stopping them from completing the validation in APNIC. There were also other cases where the whois remarks was not being updated automatically, so we had to do these manually ourselves. We also received feedback about user interface and user experience regarding APNIC. Some people felt that it was very difficult to navigate the pages. Others felt that the process was long and confusing. And due to some of the concerns that we received from the membership, the members, a decision was made by the APNIC Secretariat to temporarily stop the restriction of APNIC until the software bugs are all resolved. And Most of the bugs have been resolved so far, and the user interface has also been improved by our product team, which is it's going to be something that we'll be continuously working on over the next year. So the final phase, this is what we'll be doing over this year. Firstly, like I said, we'll reinstate the APNIC restriction once we're very confident that all the software bugs are fixed and the validation process can be completed smoothly. And as per the policy proposal, we'll finally add the abuse attribute to whois records. This will mirror the same email address that's used in the abuse mailbox attribute of the RT object. And if there are any other issues encountered this year, we'll plan to resolve them as soon as possible. And later in the year, at the APNIC 50 meeting in Bangladesh, we'll report back to the community once again to let you know how everything has gone. To finish this presentation, I'll share some feedback that we have received from members regarding this policy implementation. One example was a university which said that these emails were not actual reports of network abuse. They felt that it was a form of spam and that they had wasted their resources to complete this validation. Another example was a government department. They blatantly said that it was not a good policy, and their government have security policies in place which do not encourage them to click on links in emails due to incidents of phishing tactics in the past. And lastly, we had a large service provider who had over 100 people in their incident response team managing these network abuse reports. In this case, the one person who was looking after APNIC emails were on holidays, and the rest of the people in the team had no idea how to handle these emails and did not understand the policy. So those are some of the feedback we received. So we believe that based on the way that we've received feedback for this implementation, there's some things that we think the community should consider moving on this year. One thing is, do we feel that this policy should be amended to address some of the concerns? Secondly, do we feel that it's too harsh to penalise members by restricting APNIC access after 30 days? And lastly, should the validation process occur every 6 months, or can it be extended to 12 months to reduce the burden on members to complete this validation process? So that's the end of my presentation. If anyone has any questions or comments, please feel free to go to the microphone. I'll go back. Also, if we have any members in the room who have completed this validation, it would be good to hear about their experience, whether it's positive or negative. All feedback's welcome. Yes, yes, Jody.
One of the troublemakers with this proposal, well, with many others.
Thank you.
I don't remember, because I worked on this proposal in all the registries, and I don't remember right now the exact text we had, Aftaf and myself, in the policy proposal. But I got the same feeling, especially in the discussion in RIPE about clicking a link. RIPE is also, in case of failure of the automated validation, is also sending a link to click, and also aiding, if I am correct with the POC. Okay, so it's not true that this is not done in other registries, because it's not the same. Yeah. However, one of my considerations, and again, I don't remember if this was part of the text or not, and if this really requires a modification of the policy, or it's just an operational matter for you to decide, that instead of a single link to click, to send a text-only email instead of a link, so it avoids this phishing problem. So there are operational ways to do that, avoiding the phishing problem.
So you mean like a plain text email?
Plain text email without a link and with a code, so the link without the code don't do anything wrong.
Yeah, so that was part of our initial implementation planning. The email is actually plain text, but it does include a unique link that they click on. But initially, it was identified that there were a lot of members with more than one IRT object. So if you send one email with a link with plain text and then another one with a unique code, and some members have up to 10 or more IRT objects, you're essentially sending that member 20 to 40 emails every 6 months, which would be even more spam than what they're saying now. So that was definitely included as part of the impact assessment, and we decided that it was just not feasible to do so.
I still think it's something operational, that you can find alternative ways, but if you need a policy proposal to modify something, just let us know. Yeah. And I am sure Aftaf and myself will be able to provide something.
Yeah.
The other point is that also in other versions of this policy proposal, in other registries, I suggested after several rounds, and because here went into the first round, we didn't realize it, that both the 15 days and then 30 days and then the number of validations per year could be, instead of fixed, adapted as an operational issue that APNIC can consider depending on how the validations go. So for example, right now that you are starting, maybe you just need to do once per year. Later on, maybe you want to do more, and maybe you want to extend the validation period, okay?
Right.
I understand that in this case, yes, this is fixed in the policy text, so you cannot change right now, but I think it will be easy to reach consensus in just giving the staff let's say, the chance to modify by themselves depending on the operational situation.
Yeah, well, happy to discuss with you further and share some more information. Thanks.
Brajesh Jain, you mentioned that out of about 16,000 IRTs, 10,000 were approximately were sent.
Yep.
So, and it took about 6 months. Is it because of staff limitation that other 6,000 could not be sent? If so, that will help reaching the conclusion that we should wait 6 months or 12 months.
So with the 15,000 IRTs, some IRTs have the same email addresses, so we don't send the same email twice. So if there's multiple IRTs using the same email address, we just send it to the one person, and the one person who validates it makes it validated for all the other IRTs, if that makes sense.
So how many IRTs were actually covered actually?
So 15,000 IRTs.
They were all covered. And they were all covered.
Yes, yes.
And even though the email address is less.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
George Simon here from
Hi.
Five at Home. I have so many accounts from APNIC, so I got the mail, so many mails. The thing is that when you send, this is a comment mainly, when you send the mails, the from address is like APNIC and a number. So the next will be another number, next will be another number. And I think you have used 2 times abuse. The word is abuse.
Yeah.
All my mails go to Gmail, and it all sends to spam.
Right, yeah, we've had that, we've had a lot of
So I
reports
think
of
you
that.
changed that one.
Yeah, we'll take that into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. So I think it's a good experience and a few feedbacks. Few are really operational and like the fixing bug of the softwares and making the user interface a bit easier. But the question you asked at the end that the 30 days it is okay, or the 6 month, every 6 months or every 12 months we should do the validation. Probably the what I feel that we can wait another 6 months actually, so we will get more feedback from the community, and after making the improvement, maybe people may not dislike it that much now there actually. So we can wait for another 6 months, making some improvement, and we also actually post these questions in the mailing list as well, so that a larger community can know the challenges actually. So we may get some more feedback in the mailing list as well.
Yeah, it would be good to get the wider community's feedback and membership.
In the next meeting, probably we discuss again actually, and or if somebody can come up with some proposals to find a better solution, easier solution for the members, would be good.
Sounds good. Thanks, Simon.
Thank you, George.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
So I will request Sanjay to come up to talk about transfer consolidation.
Okay, what I'm going to present is an observation by APNIC Secretariat about the transfer consolidation. So it's about 103, our last/8. We're seeing that while the original intent for the 103/8 policy, last/8 policy, is to have each new member as well as existing member to only get /22 from those blocks, there seems to be a consolidation happening later on. And the question I would ask is simply, is this a problem or is it not a problem? But I'll show you the statistics first. How do I move forward? This one. Yeah. Okay. This is not unanticipated. Actually, when we discussed about this policy 12 years ago in Christchurch, New Zealand, this is transcription from discussion about the use of final/8 when that policy first being raised from Izumi, actually asking, what's preventing people from setting up companies and grab space from the 103/8 to consolidate later. And she was wondering at the time whether we need to put in wordings in the policy that could block this. At the time, Philip Smith was the one of the proposal for the last/8 policy, and he said that really is interesting. And but he felt like it's not a policy matter. It's probably more of how the Secretariat should handle that case to prevent people from creating bogus companies, bogus applications, just to grab hold of the last/8. So in the end, the decision was, no, we're not going to put that in the policy document, but please, can the NIRs and APNIC be vigilant and make sure that people who are getting space from 103 are actually, have no intention of consolidating later. And then 3 years later, I think, we ran out of our IPv4 space, so it triggers the last/8 policy. We received 103/8 from IANA, and from 2011 to last year, that's the consumption rate. The green bar is the consumption rate of the 103/8, which is not bad. Initially, we received an increase on a year-by-year, the consumption rate, before in 2017, when you see the drop, that's when we started seeing some consolidation, and then I think there's a proposal to say, let's freeze the 103 delegation by 5 years before it can be transferred out. I forgot who, this Japanese guy, Fujisaki-san, Tomohiro. So Tomohiro wrote a policy proposal that says, okay, let's, 103 cannot be transferred until it's 5 years from the original holders. And then it really does have an impact on the allocation. As you can see, it got dropped because I think speculators now knows that they can't do it. And then there's a consumption that goes drop further because of the allocation size now being reduced to /23. So then how can we tell if people are making consolidation? So the way I do it is I look at an organization and how many times have they received incoming transfer to that organization. So this is the statistics. There's a few organizations. This is anything more than 5, right? So an organization receiving more than 5 incoming transfers. This is the statistic for the whole 10 years. As you can see, some are in the 100 range, so some people are actually transferring hundreds of prefixes into their account. But I suspect that this is not all 103. So then I look at the size of the IPv address that comes in. Let's pick the top one, Microsoft, for example. They're only transferring 12 different transactions, but the total space that they got was like 1.5 million addresses. It can't be coming from 103, because 103 you can only get /22, which is 1,000. So 12 people with 103 transferring would only be 12,000 addresses, not 1.5 million addresses. So then I thought, okay, let's filter by which one actually transferring in 103 and which one are transferring non-103. Came up with this and further filtered down to just those who are transferring 103/8. So this is what it looks like, 14 different organizations. And as you can see, in the beginning, 2015 is the first one people are transferring 103. 2016 increase, 2017 further increase, and then Tomohiro's policy kicked in, reduced in 2018. But last year, some of the 103 space have aged more than 5 years. And then we start to see massive transfer or consolidation of 103 space. The highlight will be in China, in 2019. So, and just to confirm, as you can see, this is two different charts, but you can see the size compared to the number of transfer. It's like exactly 1,000, /22. So basically, the whole /22 is being transferred. Now, trying to look at the different angle, now not looking at the whether it's 103 or not, but simply looking at the number of transfers within economies. If there's more than 2-to-1 ratio, then I would plot it into this chart. So this is showing historically since 2015 the number of source is more than twice the number of recipient, which is another sign of consolidation. And it looks like, a consistent view that in the beginning it was less, but as on the later years, we see more consolidation. Now, so the question is simply this: is this a problem? The intent of the last/8 policy is to preserve IPv4 for new networks. Should APNIC and the NIRs challenge the registration of transfer that is not consistent with this intent? Or is it not a problem? This is a market reality. Some organizations will consolidate their last/8 holding. The statistics is in the last 10 years, only 14 members, which is like 0.09% of the total APNIC and NIR member base did that. Did more than more than five transactions to consolidate 103/8. Is it more important for APNIC and DNRs to facilitate frictionless transfer to maintain, accurate registry and prevent black market? So conservation, I think we've discussed this before, at this stage of age, registration is more important than conservation. That's it. That's my question. If I could hear your initial thoughts on, is this a problem or is this not a problem?
Thank you, Sanjay. Any comments from the audience?
Hi. Mike Burns from IP Trading. We saw this problem in RIPE, an analogous problem where a new entrance pool was reserved for new companies and where certain countries within the RIPE region seemed to spin up vast numbers of new entities strictly for the purposes of accessing the new entrant pool. The problem in RIPE was more severe than what appears to be the case in APNIC. The RIPE community recognized the problem and decided that it really wasn't worth a change in the policy to try to get around that problem. My impression is that there is always going to be a natural drive in the market for some consolidation as well as just entities not using or not needing their addresses anymore. So there's a certain percentage of this should be recognized as just a natural market reality. And I think that the APNIC staff, in our experience, has been quite vigorous at fighting this. They don't just accept it, as seems to be the case in RIPE. We had a case where before the 5-year period was established that an APNIC seller came to us with a 103 block. And despite the fact that there was no 1-year waiting period, the APNIC staff said, no, you're not going to do this, and in fact, we're going to take that block back, which they did, under the idea that the initial justification for that block must have been false.
Yeah.
So from our perspective, I don't think 0.09% is enough to get involved in trying to create a policy correction for this, because those policy corrections will inevitably lead to further problems down the road. Thanks.
Thank you. After.
Aftab Siddiqui, I totally agree with Mike on that one. I just want to give you one quick thing. Knowing most of the people in APNIC and mostly the host masters, it took me 2 weeks to justify that I am a legal entity, right? And
we were mean.
Yeah, kudos to them that they followed the procedure. But it was easy for them to follow the procedure because I am a taxpayer in Australia. That's not the case in the remaining part of the region. It's very, very difficult to do that. And the question to you would be, NIR should be vigilant.
Mm.
It's not a policy issue, it's just an operational issue.
Okay.
It's a problem, probably yes, but not for the community. It's a registry problem which the registrar should solve, not us. And the intent, yes, the last date intent is for the newcomers, and we're going to see in Jeff's presentation what is left, and not much is left. So let's see if APNIC can preserve it for the newcomers, but consolidation is going to happen. Just be vigilant. That's my only take on that.
Okay. Okay, so APNIC and NIRs will definitely be vigilant continuously, and it's good to hear the feedback. Anyone else? David.
Look, listening to this as somebody who doesn't have an interest in the 103 space, I suppose I'm feeling it would be artificial to try to
make a new policy around this.
Make a new policy
Okay.
around it.
Yeah.
It's already, yes, you don't want people acting unethically, but it's hard to stop people from complying with the letter of the law. If they've done that, there's an element that the addresses have been allocated, and the residual amount is pretty negligible.
Yeah.
What's done is done. And as the gentleman from IP Trading said, there is natural things happening. You don't want to get in the way of what is a normal behaviour for the sake of a golden ideal, which won't really have much chance of having much effect. That's my feeling. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sanjoy.
Yep.
I think we need to wait a bit. It's a problem or not a problem. We started 15 minutes late, and since we are 5 minutes, we're going to be 5 minutes late. We have one presentation left. So, Sunny, I hope you'll be very quick so that we can start our next session in time.
Okay, yeah, I understand it's important that we start the next session on time. We have proposals. So I'm going to skip some part of my policy analysis report. As Sanjay said, these are observations from the Secretariat and we're just putting out to the community. The first part we started to do from this conference onwards is the impact assessment. Now we have published that on the mailing list as well as on the website. The other areas already do this, and we thought we should do it as well, as we received some comments from the floor on in the previous conferences. So we posted this to the mailing list as well as on the website. So before the next session, when the proposals be discussed, take time to look at these our comments. Now, for some proposals, Jody already put forward new versions that we published as well. So I'm not going to go in detail of these ones, but I'll just cover the next part is the staff observations. One observation that is the experimental allocation policy. Under this policy, any entity who's willing to do any experiments can request resources from APNIC. And when I say resources, it's both V4 and V6 resources. And the allocation is a temporary basis and is for 1 year. Under the current policy, any organization can request for V4 allocation. That means we have now into 103/8 pool. If an organization come forward and request from Secretariat, we have to give it, make a delegation from that pool. And when we make a delegation from that pool, and it's returned after 1 year or 1.5 years, if we have increased that term, then that goes into quarantine for 1 year, because we can't straight away delegate that space without quarantining and looking at if there's any routes exist there, what happened. So we look at the cleaning up and then we allocate it. Now we have around 17% left in that last remaining in the 103/8. So this is a question to the community, if you want to keep the policy as it is or you want to update that policy. No need to decide it here, but something that to think about. The other one is we observed that there are some reserved spaces in other areas, but we don't have any reserved space here. In some areas, there's reserved space for IXPs, and in some areas, it's reserved space for critical infrastructure, as you can see on the screen. So again, a question to the community, do you want to reserve some space for future growth of internet exchange points and the critical infrastructure in this region or not? So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Sunny. Any quick comment on two very specific issues, especially that what about this experimental allocation? Sunny, can you please tell how many experimental allocations we have made actually in last, say, 5 years?
Last 5 years, since April 2011, we have made one experimental allocation policy. One experimental allocation.
Yeah.
Not to you, Jeff. I'm talking about the V4.
Right.
Sorry, it's a V4 experimental.
Yeah, Aftab Siddiqui. So there was when in the allocation, there was a possibility that you can ask for an IXP allocation as well, right? So that was abolished without asking the community. So I think it should be just an operational thing. We don't have anything left.
Okay, thank you.
Again, I don't see any policy reason for that.
Okay, noted, thank you. Any other comments?
If no other comments, thank you very much. These are the questions actually food for thought. Maybe.
Yeah, just think about it.
We can think about it. Yeah. Any implication, if you feel we can come up with policy or post a mailing list. And thank you very much for the and we'll be starting our next session at 11:30. Thank you very much.